Okay, this presentation is just a brief overview of research in the region. And I'm going to start in 2013, or just prior to that, as James alluded to earlier in his presentation. When Matt Rayner and others were preparing papers on, about seabirds, he was doing his PhD on Cook's petrels, and others were working in the region. There was no reference to how important this area was, and Matt and I approached the Hauraki Gulf Forum, Tim Hyam at the time, and they agreed to publish a report, a seabird plan, and it was first published in 2013 and reissued last year. And there's a few copies still for sale here. In that plan, we set out a number of strategic objectives, and this table here showed the extent of, what we felt needed to be done at the time. There's a lot of red, dark red, and pale red areas of, sort of high and medium priority in terms of research. We also set out a number of recommendations at the end of the plan in terms of both research and conservation. Now, I'm not going to go through all those, but what I'm going to do is we're 6 years on from that when we first published it, and how are we doing? You're going to hear some presentations this afternoon about aspects of, seabird biology, seabird diet and foraging. So we're doing pretty well in those areas, and of course we're being able to assess the threats and so on. But there's some things that we're just not doing well. We need to sort of pick up our game or encourage others to support us to pick up our game. In terms of conservation, island biosecurity, most of our seabirds, our precious islands, are predator-free. However, the reason why it's grey is that those islands are always at risk of reinvasion. And, my hat off to the Department of Conservation and Auckland Council and so on in trying to keep those islands predator-free. But incursions do happen. Moving on, in 2015 I was involved for 2 years working for BirdLife and Forest and Bird on the global IBA program. This is IBAs are important bird and biodiversity areas. In 2000, at the time, there was nothing for New Zealand. Now, you've heard how important New Zealand is in terms of seabirds, seabird capital and all that sort of thing. But there were no areas identified for New Zealand as important for seabirds, and we set about to address that. And the result were a series of publications. This was a sort of an overview, if you like, produced in 2013. And then in 2015 we brought out these reports which detailed, right through the country, 141 sites around the country that were important for, and we're talking not just important nationally but globally important sites for seabirds. We also identified areas at sea, and this is the one for northeastern North Island. And while meeting the criteria for a globally important site, given the multitude of highly threatened and endemic species, they're sort of meeting the criteria all the way through, it served to highlight the difficulty of establishing effective marine protection for highly mobile marine species, in this case seabirds. Of course, marine protection, when it gets talked about, tends to be have a reef focus or an eelgrass bed focus. It just can't, certainly in the sort of current context, just can't take account of birds and cetaceans and large fish and turtles moving across these big distances. Sea change, what's been going on for a while. Our contribution was to bring into that plan the movement or the distribution of seabirds and how seabirds utilise the marine area, the marine park. Now, I'm sorry about the colours. I didn't have any responsibility for the colours. I'm sure we could have come up with better colours for this, but you can see that seabirds utilise the whole of the marine park. There's no sort of little areas that you can sort of home in and say that's a hotspot, that's a hotspot, that's a hotspot. It's they're free ranging. And when the main marine plan made advances on MPAs, it's a good start. But the question remains as to how do we effectively protect these highly mobile species, and something that Alex is aware of standing back there. As James said, in 2015 we set up the trust. It was at a time when, well, up to that point, a number of us had been collaborating on projects, and we were out there searching for funding. It was a difficult task, particularly when you're a bunch of individuals. You might be from an institution, or you might be from a museum, you might be working for NIWA, but there was no sort of collective entity that we could then take out for funding. And I can remember with the New Zealand Storm Petrel project, when we discovered them breeding on Aotearoa, we ran out of money, and I just remember the team was up in the hills there, and I was standing on the beach on the phone trying to sort of beg for money so we could carry on with our project. Forming the trust, it's allowed us to get out there and find funding and support for a whole range of projects. And a good example of this has been funding that we've received from from Foundation North through their GIFT initiative, or the Golf Initiative. And this has brought in collaboration with the university, primarily through Brendan sitting over there, Department of Conservation through contracts and so on, Birds New Zealand through support on various projects. But as an entity, we were able to go and push for this funding, and we've received a considerable amount of money for 3 years research. Of course, there's a lot of there's a good amount of other research happening within the Gulf, and a classic example of that is this woman sitting here at the end of this row down here, Biz Bell, who's been working away on black petrels for forever and a day. And Wildlife Management International, the outfit that Biz and her family set up. I've been working on a number of projects, including the pied shag census. Dave Towns and Holly Jones, through their work with students, looking at island restoration, the Auckland Museum and Auckland Council, Tim Lovegrove, Matt Rayner working on spotted shags. Various university projects prior to the GIFT suite of projects that have come in now. And aerial surveys that Peter Frost had initiated and supported by Birds New Zealand and DOC. And of course the New Zealand Storm Petrel that Matt Rayner and I have been leading on. Now you're going to hear about some of these during the course of today. So looking ahead, a consortium of researchers are in the process of securing a 10-year research authority. That's a Wildlife Act authority. It allows us to do a suite of or a range of projects without individually having to go out and get a particular permit for a particular project. The Auckland Council, and you're going to hear about this through Gaia, has begun a monitoring program for seabirds and shorebirds within the Auckland region. And we're seeing an increasing number of restoration projects happening around not only the Hauraki Gulf, but further north, and you're going to hear about some of those this afternoon. I think by the end of the day, you will appreciate the seabird community here in northern New Zealand is in pretty good shape. I'd like to briefly mention the Kermadec region, because the Seabird Trust is also active within that region. In 2011, I prepared a plan for the Department of Conservation on Kermadec seabirds. There were research expeditions For a while, Karen Baird was the program manager for RAL and the Kermadex, and with her interest in science, she encouraged researchers to get up there and do work, and that sort of kicked off some of the seabird work that continues or will continue into the future. In 2015, I was up there with Mark Miller, and we had the delight in discovering those two birds. That's the bottom one is the Kermadec storm petrel, the top one is the Kermadec little shearwater. Now, these birds have never been recorded on Raoul Island. They're the small birds wiped out by predators, wiped out by human activity on the islands, rats, cats, goats, and so on. In 2015, we discovered them on the island. We discovered the little shearwaters breeding. We had the Kermadec storm petrels flying into our bivvy site. Subsequently, they've been found breeding on Raoul. In terms of, as one person who's involved in eradication said, that sort of news is gold when you're sort of out there promoting the need to eradicate predators. So, thank you for that. That's a brief introduction. I'd like to introduce our next speaker.